Have you ever been the only person in the room who actually knew what was happening and still been treated like you were just there to take notes? That was me, every single day. For 4 years. I was 26 when my father called me into his office and offered me a job at his company. Not with a contract sitting on the desk, not with a formal offer letter. Just him leaning back in his chair, hands folded, like he was doing me the biggest favor of my life. "You're smart," he said. "I need someone I can trust." I remember thinking that was the nicest thing he'd said to me in years. I should have known that when my father starts with a compliment, there's always a catch buried somewhere underneath it. The company was a mid-sized commercial real estate consulting firm based in Atlanta. My father had built it over 20 years, mostly through relationships, old money handshakes, golf course deals, the kind of business that still runs on who you know rather than what you know. He had two other people he trusted with the real work: my older brother, who handled client acquisition, and my younger brother, who was technically the office manager but spent most of his time on his phone and leaving at 3 p.m. to beat traffic. And then there was me. My title was Operations Coordinator. I had a business degree from Georgia Tech and had spent 2 years at a regional consulting firm where my father called. I thought Operations Coordinator was just the starting point, a placeholder while I proved myself. I didn't realize until much later that it was designed to be a ceiling. I managed vendor contracts, oversaw the project management software we used to track active listings, handled all the compliance paperwork for our commercial property assessments. And this is the part that still makes my stomach clench when I think about it. I was the one who built and maintained the client relationship system that became the backbone of how the entire firm operated. Every contact, every follow-up schedule, every deal pipeline. I built it from scratch in my first 6 months because the old spreadsheet system was a disaster. My father loved it. He showed it to clients like it was a proprietary tool the firm had developed. He never once mentioned who built it. My older brother was paid $180,000 a year. My younger brother, who I watched spend 45 minutes one afternoon looking for the stapler, was paid $140,000. I found this out not because anyone told me, but because I was the one who processed payroll through our accounting software every 2 weeks. I was making $47,000. I want you to sit with that for a second. I was doing the work that kept the company functional, building tools the partners bragged about to clients, and I was making roughly a quarter of what my brother made to drive around and take people to lunch. I told myself it made sense for a while. I was newer. I was still learning the business. My brothers had been involved longer. I made excuses the way you do when the alternative, admitting that your own father sees you as less valuable, is too painful to look at directly. The first time I tried to talk to him about it, we were in his office after everyone else had left. I had done the math. I had actual numbers, productivity metrics, client retention data I'd compiled, a breakdown of which functions would need to be outsourced and at what cost if I wasn't there. I'd stayed up until 1 a.m. preparing it because I thought if I came in with data instead of emotion, he'd hear me differently. He listened. Then he said, "You're doing great work, sweetheart, but this is a relationship business. Your brothers are out there building the relationships that bring in the revenue. That's where the real value is." I asked him what my value was, then. He said, "You keep the engine running. Engines don't need to be paid like drivers." I drove home that night and sat in my parking lot for 20 minutes before I could go inside. I didn't quit. Not yet. Because I had convinced myself that if I stayed patient, if I kept producing, if I kept being indispensable, eventually the math would have to change. That's what I told myself. But the truth is, I was afraid. I was afraid that if I left my father's company, I would find out that he was right, that I was only valuable inside a structure someone else had built for me, that I didn't have enough on my own. That fear kept me there longer than anything else. The moment that finally broke something loose in me happened on a Tuesday afternoon in March. We had a major client, a regional developer out of Nashville, who was looking to expand into 3 Georgia markets simultaneously. It was the biggest active account we had, worth just under $2 million in projected fees over 18 months. My older brother was the relationship lead. I had built the entire proposal framework, drafted the scope documents, and set up the client portal they used to track deliverables. My brother's name was on everything. Mine wasn't on any of it. The client flew in for an in-person meeting. I had prepared the presentation materials, confirmed the conference room, set up the video link for their CFO, who was joining remotely, and organized all the supporting documentation into folders on the shared drive. When they arrived, my father introduced everyone. My older brother, my younger brother, who had shown up 15 minutes before the meeting still smelling like his lunch. The firm's senior advisor who was 71 and mostly there for credibility. Then me. And this is my daughter. She helps keep things organized. She helps keep things organized. Not. She built the proposal framework. Not. She manages the client portal you've been using. Not. She's the reason this meeting is running smoothly. She helps keep things organized. Like I was the one who made sure the pens worked and the water glasses were full. The Nashville client, to his credit, turned to me and asked a direct question about the compliance timeline on one of the market assessments. I answered it. Fully. With specific dates, regulatory references, and a contingency note about a zoning variance issue we'd flagged 2 weeks earlier. He nodded and made a note and said, "That's exactly what I needed to know." Good. My father moved on like it hadn't happened. After the meeting, when the clients had gone back to their hotel, my father pulled me aside and said, "Good job today." I waited. That was it. Good job today. My younger brother, who had contributed exactly 1 sentence during the entire 2-hour meeting. Something about the Braves' spring training schedule, was taken to dinner that night with the senior advisor. I was not invited. I found out about the dinner when I saw the receipt come through in our expense management system the next morning. I went home and I called my best friend. We'd been close since undergrad. She was doing her 2nd year of residency and exhausted, but she listened anyway, and I told her the whole thing. She said, "You've been describing a slow erosion for 2 years. When does it stop?" I didn't have an answer. What I had instead was time. And I started using it differently. I didn't make any sudden moves. I didn't update my LinkedIn or start sending out resumes. What I did, quietly and carefully, was start documenting everything. The tools I'd built, the processes I'd designed, the client systems I'd created and maintained. I went back through my email archives and pulled together a record of every deliverable I'd produced, every client interaction I'd handled, every time I'd been the one to catch an error before it became a problem. I built a portfolio. I did it the way you do something you're not sure you'll ever actually use. Carefully, methodically, not quite letting yourself believe it's real yet. And then I read my employment agreement. I had signed it 4 years earlier without a lawyer. My father had handed it to me across his desk, and I had signed it because he was my father, and I trusted him, and it was 12 pages, and I was 26, and I thought employment contracts at family companies were basically formalities. I was not wrong that it was a formality. I was wrong about which direction the formality was designed to protect. The agreement classified me as a 1099 independent contractor, not a W-2 employee. I had been filing my taxes accordingly every year, paying self-employment tax on top of income tax, which I had accepted as just the way things worked at small family firms. But the 1099 classification meant something else, something I hadn't looked at carefully until now. It meant that my intellectual property protections were different. The work I'd produced, the client relationship system, the proposal frameworks, the compliance templates, the entire operational infrastructure I had built over 4 years. Under standard W-2 employment, those would have belonged to the company automatically. But I was classified as an independent contractor, and the contract my father had drawn up, which I found out later he had downloaded from a legal template website and barely modified, did not contain a proper IP assignment clause. There was a vague sentence about work product, but it was poorly written and almost certainly unenforceable under Georgia law for the specific types of deliverables I had created independently, on my own time, using my own tools, in the early months before I even had proper system access. I called a real attorney, not a family friend, not someone my father knew. I found an employment and IP lawyer in Atlanta who specialized in contractor disputes, and I paid for a 1-hour consultation out of my own pocket, and I laid out the whole situation. She looked at the contract. She looked at my documentation. She said, "This is not a well-drafted agreement." Then, she said something that I have thought about almost every day since. "You built the engine. The question is whether you gave it away when you signed this, and I don't think you did." I took another 2 months before I did anything. 2 months where I showed up every day and did my job and was professional and gave no indication that anything was different. During that time, I completed a few things quietly. I made sure every major tool and system I'd built was thoroughly documented, not for the company's benefit, but so I could demonstrate clearly that I had created these things independently. I also, and I want to be specific about this because I know people will ask, made sure that nothing I did during those 2 months harmed the business or the clients. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I was just preparing to leave. I also started building something else. I had a contact at a commercial property management company in Charlotte, who I'd worked with directly for 2 years. All her communications came through me. Not through my brothers, not through my father. We had a real working relationship. I told her honestly that I was planning to launch my own consulting practice and asked if she'd be interested in continuing to work together directly. She said, without hesitating, "I've been wondering when you were going to do this." That meant more to me than I can explain. My resignation happened on a Thursday. I had asked my father if we could meet privately, and he'd scheduled 20 minutes between 2 other appointments, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously he was taking it. I sat down across from him, and I told him I was resigning, effective immediately, and that I would be starting my own consulting practice. He stared at me for a moment, then he laughed. Not a disbelieving laugh, not a nervous laugh, a real, genuine, dismissive laugh, like I'd told him something mildly absurd. "You're going to start your own firm," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "With what? You've never brought in a single client. You don't have relationships. You have organizational skills." He said organizational skills the way you'd say cute hobby. "You'll come back within 6 months." I thanked him for the opportunity, and I left. He texted me that night. "When you're ready to come back, we'll talk." No acknowledgement that I might not come back. No acknowledgement that losing me might actually cost him something. Just the assumption that I'd circle back, tail between my legs, grateful for the second chance. I didn't respond. What happened in the next 60 days was not easy. I want to be honest about that because I think people sometimes tell these stories like the moment you walk out is the moment everything clicks into place, and that wasn't my experience. I was scared. I was running on savings and freelance income and the one retainer agreement I'd set up with my Charlotte contact, which was real money, but not enough to feel stable. I was working from my kitchen table. I had imposter syndrome so bad that I would sometimes sit down to work on a client deliverable and spend 20 minutes just staring at the document because some voice in my head kept saying, "Who do you think you are?" I pushed through it the way you push through most hard things. Not by feeling confident, but by doing the work anyway. And then my father called me. It was about 6 weeks after I'd left. He didn't open with pleasantries. He said, "I need you to walk Kevin's team through the compliance documentation for the Cobb County assessment. They can't find the files and the deadline is next week." Kevin's team was the Nashville client's internal team, the one I had been managing the relationship with for 8 months. The compliance documentation he was referring to was the system I had built, and it turned out that without me there to run it, no one at the firm could figure out how to navigate it. Because I had built it, and I had documented it, and that documentation was on my personal drive, not theirs, because they had never asked me to transfer it to a company system, because they had never fully understood what I had built or how it worked. I told my father I was no longer an employee of the firm and that if he needed consulting support, I could provide it at my standard rate, which I had set at $185 per hour. There was a very long silence. Then he said, "You're going to charge your own father." And I said, "You paid me $47,000 a year to do the work of someone you'd pay $200,000 on the open market. I think we've already established what this relationship looks like when it's professional." He hung up. My attorney had already sent a formal letter to the firm notifying them that the operational systems and frameworks I had created as an independent contractor, specifically the client relationship management system, the compliance documentation templates, and the proposal generation framework, were my intellectual property under the terms of the contractor agreement as written, and that any continued use without a licensing agreement would constitute infringement. My father's response, through a lawyer he hired, was that the IP clause in the contract covered my work. My attorney's response was 12 pages long and methodically dismantled every point. The core of it came down to this: the work product language in my contract was generic, untailored, and failed to meet the specificity requirements that Georgia courts have applied to independent contractor IP assignments. Combined with the fact that I had created the initial versions of several key systems on my own time and using my own software subscriptions, before I even had formal company access, the assignment was almost certainly invalid. The Nashville client, who had been with the firm for the better part of a year entirely because of my relationship management, reached out to me directly 3 weeks after I left. I hadn't contacted him. He found my new consulting practice through LinkedIn and sent me a message that just said, "I heard you went independent. Are you taking clients?" We had a call. I was honest with him about my situation. He was honest with me about his. He said the transition at the firm had been rocky. The new contact they'd assigned him didn't know the account history, and he'd had to repeat the same background information 3 different times in 2 weeks. He signed a retainer with my firm 4 days later. The contract value over 12 months was $340,000. I remember the moment I saw the signed agreement come through. I was still at my kitchen table. I read it twice to make sure I was reading it correctly. Then I sat back and I cried, not sad crying, just release. The release of 4 years of being told, implicitly and explicitly, that I wasn't the valuable one, that I was the engine, not the driver. That organizational skills were a cute hobby. The IP dispute was ultimately settled. The firm paid a licensing fee to use the systems I had created for a period of 2 years while they built out replacements. The total amount was not nothing. My attorney took her percentage and I put the rest into the business. My father did not apologize. I want to be clear about that because I think the story feels incomplete without it. He did not call and say he had undervalued me or that he had been wrong. What he did, about 4 months later, through my younger brother acting as an awkward intermediary, was float the idea of me coming back as a partner. The offer was vague and unstructured, which told me it wasn't a real offer. It was a way of not admitting anything while still trying to fix the problem I had created by leaving. I declined, through my brother, politely and finally. What I found out, over the following year, mostly through industry contacts in Atlanta's commercial real estate community, was that the firm had struggled more than my father had expected. The Nashville client leaving cost them significantly. 2 other clients I had been the primary contact for followed me within 6 months. They had my contact information from years of direct communication and reached out on their own, the same way the Nashville client had. My father apparently told people I had stolen his clients. I had not solicited a single one. They came because the relationship had always been with me, not with the firm. My father had just never noticed because he'd never thought of me as the one building the relationships. My younger brother, from what I understand, is still there, still leaving at 3 p.m. My older brother moved on to a different firm about a year later, which I think was probably the right move for him. I don't hold anything against my older brother, honestly. He benefited from a system he didn't design. That's different from designing the system. My father and I have a relationship now, that is what it is. We talk on holidays. It is careful and a little formal, and we both know the shape of what happened, even if we don't talk about it directly. I think there are things he understands now that he didn't understand then. Whether he would say that out loud is a different question. My firm is 2.5 years old. I have 4 full-time contractors working with me and a client roster that has grown entirely through referrals. We specialize in compliance operations and process infrastructure for commercial real estate firms, exactly what I was doing at my father's company, except now my name is on it. Last quarter, we cleared more in 3 months than I made in my entire 4 years working for my father. I still have the text he sent me the night I resigned. When you're ready to come back, we'll talk. I've thought about responding to it a few times, just to close the loop. But I don't think I need to. The answer has been written in everything that came after. Some things don't need to be said out loud when the numbers already speak clearly enough. He paid me $47,000 a year and called me the engine. I took the engine with me, and he found out too late that a firm without its engine doesn't really go anywhere.